Welcome to the Intrinsic First Leadership Podcast. I'm Aaron Robbins with Intrinsic First. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on our latest episodes. Ready to dive into the world of leadership? Let's get started. Well, welcome back to the Intrinsic First Leadership Podcast. We are sans Jimmy today. He had another obligation that he had to take care of, but we have special guest James Roe here, and he's filling Jimmy's seat, kind of. But we're not going to talk about just a general leadership topic. We're going to talk to James and hear about some of his cool background and leadership stories. Being a newly taken over a new company or as co-owner recently with a lot of other leadership experience in the background. So with that, why don't we just start out? If you want to just give us a little background about yourself and tell us who you are.
Okay. Well, I started in the Navy. I enlisted in the Navy at 18. Went submarines, spent 2 years in sub school in Connecticut, and then 4 years stationed here on the Chicago. While I was in boot camp, the Gulf War broke out, so all of my deployments were Gulf deployments, very intense. And like we were talking about, it was so long ago that most of the memories have faded to that, but some of the cool stuff sticks around. And I got out of the Navy, went to school, did my undergraduate in Nebraska. Did some farm work while I was there, really learning some hard work.
Yeah, wow.
But finished my undergraduate and wanted to be back in San Diego, so I moved back right away. Took a government job. I was a contracts officer at 32nd Street doing ship repair contracts in the early days of that 7-9-11 intern program that they were doing.
As a government employee?
As a government employee, yeah. And it was a great program. I'm sure that there's still some version of it, but they recruited folks coming out of college with very specific requirements, and then they taught you everything you need to know about government contracts or whatever your intern program was about. So kind of a crash course in learning contracts on the government side. And I realized a couple of years into that I really missed the submarine world. So I finished my master's while I was as a government employee. And then right after that, Booz Allen called and recruited me to go work at NAVWAR in the submarine program office, which was perfect for me because I was relatively new out of the service, serving submarines. So it was a great transition for me getting back into that community. And I worked early days at Common Submarine Radar Room for almost 5 years while I made that transition. Learned a lot at Booz Allen about this business and what we do and the back office piece. And couple of years into my Booz Allen time, they lost the contract that I was on, and CSA won it. So that was my transition. I was terrified of going to, essentially it was a startup at the time. There was 10 or 12 people at the time.
Local, right?
Local here in San Diego, yeah. But I made the jump a lot to just stay with the submarine community, but to just try out the small business piece of it. And like we were talking about, it was fun. It was exciting. I was busy. I didn't like when I was a Govy, it was, kind of watching the clock and doing your time, where CSA was, you're leaned in and you're part of a bigger group. And I learned even more about the business and the back side of the business. And I eventually got out of the 770 in the program, in the submarine program office and moved to 160. And that was really the first leadership. I was the team lead for that. And that team varied between 6 and 12 people, depending on when it was. And that's where we met.
That's where we met. You guys were a sub, I think.
We were, under SRA at the time. And it was all very exciting because it was all new for everyone. And it was also the early days of Canes. I worked that for a couple of years, their first contract and acquisition strategy, then rolled into AD&S, and that's where we met. And then NEEF, and then eventually I just moved to the back office at CSA. Brian wanted me to come back and work proposals and run pieces of the business, and I got exposure to a bunch of just running the business piece. A lot of it's mundane, but needs to be done, and some folks don't like doing that, and I did.
You were running infrastructure, pretty much, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty much everything but ops and finance. So it was security, it was admin, it was facilities, IT, HR, recruiting. I spent a lot of time flying around the country finding office space for us as we won new contracts, which that was pretty cool.
I remember when you expanded across the hall.
Oh, yeah.
And that was when you were supporting me at the NEEF part-time. And man, the excitement in this guy showing me this, because they doubled their space. At the time, I was a govy. I didn't fully understand like what that really meant for a company and the growth. But man, I remember he was excited showing me an open area with some chairs and cubicles.
Well,
he loved it.
Yeah, that was a time where we were doubling every year or more.
Yeah,
so it was just exciting to continue that expansion. For me, that time between startup and 100 employees is just fun, because everyone's kind of leaned in. You're establishing your culture and what you want it to be, or it just establishes itself, and everyone's kind of focused on growth and doing great things. So it was a lot of fun. Plus, in that job, I pretty much just did whatever none of the other directors wanted to do, which I liked because it was a lot of variety. I'd get bored pretty quickly, so just taking on new things and trying new things and figuring them out. Like HR, I've never done HR before. I don't know anything about HR. Let's go figure it out.
Been there, done that.
Right, yeah. Same with security. I didn't know anything about security, but you just kind of dig in and figure it out. IT, same thing. I still don't know a ton about IT, but I had a great IT manager, Jason, who kind of walked me through it, and I learned as we went. And then just kind of pushing we need to spend more money on this. We need to invest in infrastructure here, and getting good at pitching ideas to executive level, like putting yourself in their head of, all right, what do they want to hear? What questions would I ask? Right. What is going to sell them on this idea? And I did a lot of that. And Brian was Brian, so it was not always easy, but I got a lot of exposure there. And eventually, I was at CSA for about 10 years when I rolled out of there. Just I'd kind of reached my peak. We were at, I don't even remember, like 300 something. I don't know.
We had grown a lot.
Yeah.
It was after EIS, so we had close to 300.
And I was spending a bunch of time on the East Coast, with the expansions there. And it wasn't the job that it was before. So it was just time for me to move on. I floated around a little bit while I was trying to figure out what I was doing. But I eventually landed at Tasks. It was an Intel company, just to get back in the SCI, black world. And while I was there about 3 months, and they got bought by Agility. So I got to go through this big company merger. It was two big companies merging together, and which I had never done before. So that was an experience, the politics of that at the direct level, and who's, maneuvering, and who's going to stay and who's going to take over this. So it was interesting, but that job was much more focused. I essentially just shifted to business development. So instead of having 12 jobs, I just had one, and it was business development. I had some great people I was working with on that team, and I was there about 3 years, and they were building to sell. We kind of knew that.
Yeah.
So they eventually cut all of the leadership. They were cleaning out overhead to make the company more profitable for sale. So that was an experience, and it kind of soured me to the industry going through that in kind of quick succession, the departure from CSA and then the thing with Agility. So I decided, all right, I want to do something different. And I bounced out of defense and went to aerospace. It was a chance for me to move up to Washington and be close with my parents, which I hadn't done in decades. So I tried it, and it was too much of a change. I was really surprised. The work itself wasn't hard, but the culture around it was so different. It was culture shock, just trying to get up to speed in a brand new industry, learn everything about the industry, learn what I was doing. I was managing contracts for Zodiac Aerospace. They had the Boeing 787 Dreamliner contract for all the interiors and a few other things, and I managed that as a contracts manager. And it was a very different job. I've never done anything like that, managing hundreds of thousands of parts, negotiating with Boeing.
So it was all commercial contracts,
100% commercial, yeah. And the difference is staggering between federal and commercial. A federal contract will be 200 pages, and that's not, unusual.
Right.
I think our contract was 20 for $1 billion or whatever it was. I mean, it was a very big contract, but it was a very tiny contract.
Yeah.
So it was so different than what I was used to. And I was picking it up, but the company and the culture there, they were also building to sell. They ended up selling while I was there. With it, the year I was there, they sold. And I had just gone through that. And I really didn't want to go through that again. And I just kind of got lucky, and a headhunter had found me and wanted me to come back to San Diego. So I did. I worked at another small company, and I had missed, the small company piece. So I worked at a small company for a few years here in San Diego. And that enabled me to come back to San Diego, reintegrate into my network, refresh all those relationships, and which was great. And I rolled out of there, and I went independent for a while, just doing business development, but as a contractor, hired gun to work proposals or, capture whatever companies needed. And that was great. I enjoyed that. It was really what I did. Decent money doing that. And I got to work with people I wanted, and I got to pick the projects that I did. Did that for a few years. The only problem with that was it's peaks and valleys. You're either really busy or you're not doing anything. So
less stable.
Yeah, and I was just going into COVID with that and the instability of it. So there were a couple of companies that were interested in me, both small businesses, and it was just kind of a timing of were they going to win contracts that could pick me up, and Jack just happened to be the first one, and I really like Jack Turner. He's the CEO of Excite, brought me into Excite. And it was just perfect because it's back to the early days of like what CSA was. We're a very small company working higher end niche engineering stuff. And he doesn't enjoy running the business, the back office business part. And I mean, that's what I've done most of my career. So I do that. I don't do direct billable anymore. I haven't done that since CSA really. So more than 10 years. And that's what I do every day.
Yeah. Crazy. I didn't realize how diverse your experience was. I knew everything from CSA. And I think when you came back to San Diego, the first time I ran into you was at Mission Bay. I was doing a run with my team challenge group, and you were just happened to be walking down the boardwalk. But yeah, I mean, not only it's small business, large business, mergers and acquisitions, independent, government, commercial. So,
and I didn't do that on purpose, but I couldn't have planned it any better. Really, I got the government side early, and being a contracts person, knowing the government side of that. Now that I'm on the other side of it, why I wrote a contract the way I did, what I was actually looking for when I write this, I really want you to answer this way. Now, being on the other side of it with that experience, you don't run into a lot of people who were contracts officer who flip to this side. So it's definitely a niche for me that has worked well.
Right.
And then to your point, like the experience I gained at Booz Allen was invaluable. I had an early mentor there, Brian Kimura, was my lead at the time. And he exposed me to that side of it, the RFP side and the managing the money side, and started to really establish my network I didn't realize it at the time, but how important that was to the rest of my career. It really got me going.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And then taking that experience and to a startup and relearning a whole bunch of different things that you wouldn't normally get exposed to, running security or IT or, the day-to-day of running a business.
But it also sounds like you were open to trying all those things out. It's like, sure, I'll do it, whatever. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think not enough people do that, of like just the fear of the unknown keeps them from just trying.
Right.
And what's the worst that happens is you just don't do a good job and you learn from it and then you do a better job the next time.
Did you say you were from San Diego? You were born in San Diego?
I was born in New York, raised in Washington. I was stationed here in 92 and pretty much never left. I moved away a couple of times, but I've been here almost my whole life.
Yeah. West Coast.
Yeah.
They go like this. W. I don't know. I was never in a gang, so.
I am now, but it's VFW.
Oh, yes, right. It is kind of like a gang, right in with your motorbikes.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, he's a big VFW guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, how long were you in?
I was active duty for 6 years, and most of that was
Deployed.
Is
that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Submarine life is a hard life. Then you layer on top of it, actually in theater, doing what submarines do. It was fairly intense, and we just kept going back. All of my deployments were there. So by the time I was done, I was done. I was ready to roll out, which was my plan all along. I went in the military. My family's always gone in the military. My dad pretty much predetermined that both my brother and I were going to be military. So I did that in order to get the experience, and then plan was to go to college, which is exactly what I did. And it really worked well for me. My undergraduate experience was very different than a normal undergraduate. I wasn't 18.
Yeah, you're a lot older.
Right. It was a job, and I was focused, and I was also working full time. So I really took it seriously.
Was that when you were at Booz or when you were in the government?
Before.
Okay.
When I got out of the Navy, I just worked, whatever job I could get, college jobs, and
work in the corner.
Well, I worked at a bank, or I worked the farm for a few years.
Male gigolo.
Yeah, that's implied.
That was just for the extra spending cash.
Nice, yeah, and there wasn't a lot of that. But military background definitely made that a lot easier for me.
You were enlisted?
I was.
Submarine bubblehead.
Submarine radioman.
Just like Jimmy started. Well, Jimmy started.
That's where Jimmy started. Yeah, decided to get into that.
But then he went to the academy.
Yeah, Annapolis.
Yeah, and when I was at Nebraska, the ROTC program really wanted, they were really focused on veterans to try and bring them back in.
Okay.
And I really just didn't want to do that. I wasn't interested in flying like everyone was. Like Brian was talking about our generation, the Top Gun.
Yep.
And that's legit. That's real. That's part, I did the same thing.
Right.
But flying just wasn't, I wasn't
you
as
knew
interested.
You were going to throw up when you got up in the sky?
I don't know. I don't know about that. It was just, I knew I didn't want to make it a career. It was a means to an end to move my career forward and enable me to afford school.
Yeah.
And my dad preached that. He was, retired Army. And his advice was get every piece of schooling that you can out of it. And I did. I really leaned in. I got so much training. I spent 2 years in sub school before I ever set foot on a submarine. They don't mess around with training.
Yeah.
And then while you're on the boat, they'll send you back to every school that you want to go to. So I took advantage of that. I qualified as a sonar person, as a radioman, just because I thought it was neat. I wanted to do it.
Sure.
Photographer, but back when it was actual film. Periscope photographer, like just any obscure class I could get, I took. Which, I didn't use a lot of that stuff, but it taught me how to use the tool and flex that muscle. And having all of that heading into an undergraduate, and then I did my undergrad and grad back to back. I was ready.
As you think about what you're doing now, what's the hardest part of your job?
Juggling all the balls. Really, to me. None of the individual tasks are extraordinarily difficult. There's just a lot of it to keep track of. Some of the proposal stuff can get a little overwhelming. You go through that whole cycle of the proposal is released, you start reading, and you start panicking, like, oh my God, this can be so much work. How am I going to do all of this? Then you kind of start figuring it out, and then the panic starts to go down. Then you do your first review, and the panic goes back up.
Oh God, so many comments.
No, yeah.
We're not nearly as far as we need to be.
When you do that 100 times, then you recognize what the pattern is, and you can guide people who have never been through it, and that's fun, being able to do that, help other people.
But the hardest part is what?
Of the job itself?
What about the management of people?
So for me, what's worked best for me is just being genuine with people. I think people pick up on that, that they can tell when you're being genuine with them, when you actually care. And that goes a long way. I tell people who are interested in getting into management, people are messy. They have things going on. Everybody, like every team, guaranteed there are a few people who are dealing with some stuff outside of their job. And that's part of it. You have to be empathetic to that and understand it. Yep. And sometimes it's you. and you just have to be able to manage that emotions of that, the emotional intelligence that requires to do that, and just be genuine with people. That's always worked well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you manage a lot of people in your current role, or is Jack doing most of the people side?
Not as much as I used to, just because we're too small.
Yeah.
I mean, as we get bigger, I'll move back into that.
What's
type
bigger?
Of role.
What are you now?
Right now we're 12 or 13, and we just picked up our prime follow-ons. We'll double, probably triple in the next 3 or 4 months, and then we'll be back on that trajectory.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
Yeah, I've been leaning in hard, proposing on everything that I can, working the teaming. Us re-winning our prime is huge for us.
You are the prime. You are the prime.
How's the re-winning add growth? Is it just the contract grew?
Kind of. So the original prime was a SDVSOB direct award, so it was capped at $4 million. This is it's another direct award, but they did a J&A, and it's to expand the scope. So we already know it's a 5-year contract, and we're still in negotiations on it, but it's looking like it'll at least double based on what they want. Yeah. So and then we've got some other things in the hopper that I think will come through. Like there's 4 or 5 things that we've bid on that we probably won't hit on all of them, but we'll hit on 1 or 2 of them. And with that, plus this, we'll double, triple, maybe quadruple.
And you're at 13 now?
Yeah. So it's a great starting point. That's a good stable base. It's enough to afford at least one overhead person to do what I do. And then as we continue to grow, start filling in some of those roles.
Yeah, because with 12, you can't.
Yeah, it's you wear
I'm
every
only
hat.
part-time for that.
Yeah, and right now Jack's at least half-time billable also, which having your CEO half-time billable is tough. Yeah. I mean, it's a great strategic move for us and what he's doing, but long-term, we need him back.
Yeah, a half-time job is also usually oftentimes more than half-time.
Right, yeah. So that opportunity came up for him a few months ago, and we talked about it and decided, strategically, this is a smart move for us. So let's do this, knowing I'd pick up a lot of that slack while he's doing the direct stuff, and I still got the better end of the deal because he's working harder than I am, obviously, doing the direct plus the CEO role. But I don't know that we'll have him do that for a long time.
So with these podcasts, I've been kind of starting to shape where we're trying to go with it and what we're trying to do. And I kind of like the great people doing great things sort of theme. And I think that has to do with kind of twofold. One is how you get to that point, right? The life cycle and the experiences that kind of led people to where they are. And then also what they're doing and how they do it now, right? All the things that they've learned.
The answer, I think, having built a company from zip to 8 people to, to 100, I guess what we were, 120 at one point. There's a critical mass of people. And once you pass that critical mass, you have different problems than you have.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So small, people, small amount of people. And of course, you sound like they're spread all over the place.
Yeah, we have pretty much everyone works remote. More than half of our people are in Colorado Springs or around that area, but
That's
working
where the client
remotely.
is,
right? They're in the Springs, and then we have some folks here in San Diego. Jack is really the only one who goes into the office every day because he has to go across the street.
Mm-hmm.
I go in every once in a while, but yeah, it's managing a team that's spread out. Most of them working from home.
So before we kind of dive into the current work that you're doing, one question I have is just, what do you think were some of the most key or important milestones along your career that's kind of led you to where you are and led you to the philosophy and the experience that you have today?
So, again, I didn't plan it, but the entering this industry on the government side, especially in contracts, I think ended up being very helpful for me long term. Deciding to leave there and go to Booz Allen and the help that Brian gave me, really getting exposure to the rest of the business was really set me up for everything that I've done. The decision to leave a large, stable company and go to a startup was terrifying, but making that call and doing it ended up, I think, being phenomenal for me. I spent 10 years learning as much as I could. The mentorship that I got from Dan Gomrick while I was at CSA and Brian, and then being able to work with a lot of really great folks who are very energized through that life cycle they were talking about of, you start at a dozen people, those problems are very different than when you're at 100 people, and learning what those are. Because we were all kind of learning it at the same time, but living through it, I've taken those lessons to where I'm at now, building the scale, and having that experience. I know, all right, well, we need to have this HR system figured out because if we're 100 people, we don't want to be dealing with this. Yeah. So taking those lessons were very important. I'd say being independent for a few years was important for me to just get that exposure to where I was relying just on myself for my complete income, and forced me to work my network, because in any industry, but especially this one, your network is very important.
Sure.
People like doing business with people they like, and if you're not networking, they don't know you. So that's a very important part of it, because there's, with the structure and the way that we do this, a prime sub, you got to trust the people that you're working with. If you're a sub, you want to trust your prime. You're a prime, you want to trust your sub. So the importance of that network and what I've learned, at each of these steps has definitely helped me with where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Getting into contracts, it's, if you don't find like an internship or something like that, it's almost a catch-22, because
it's tough.
You got to have the experience to get the job, and you got to get the job to have the experience.
Well, and that's where I think, like, I presented at the Emerging Professionals FCA, and they had a lot of questions about that. And my advice is always volunteer for whatever, go try it.
Step up. Right.
If somebody's going to give you a chance to try and learn something, that's an opportunity. Yeah. And you might not like it, but you won't know until you do it. And you don't know if you're going to be successful until you do it. And I think so many people are so terrified of trying that they just don't. And then they just,
or they're just comfortable. And they're
there's nothing wrong with that.
I'm going to stick with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a theme that I've seen across the people we've interviewed, but also just a lot of people I know, is that curiosity, and a little risk taking, I guess, along with it.
Well, I was thinking one of the benefits, it sounds to me, that you guys have that we didn't have when we were starting our business was we didn't have the systems necessary to make things uniformly work. Like we had no inventory. We were building inventory and trying to sell it.
Yeah, and you had hard products with all the training stuff.
So we're sitting there going, really? And then when I think about all our financial reporting and we must have switched systems about 3 times in the midst of all of that, and just everybody was just not another one. I don't want to, So
Right.
and coming out of an academic background, there was nothing.
Yeah.
There was nothing. So it's interesting, the growth question, and what do you do with what? It sounds to me like you were managing a lot of systems that you didn't have any sense. So you were talking about HR or not. What's that? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you just jump in and learn it.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, when someone throws something at me, it's usually not hard. It's complicated, and you have to unpack it and break it down into little tasks. But at the end of the day, you're not building a bridge or
It's not rocket science.
right. Yeah, it's just a business process, and if it's something new that you've never done before, yeah, it's a little intimidating. But if you dig into it, you break it down, figure it out, ask some questions, talk to people who've done it before, and all of a sudden, it's not that hard.
Yeah, but I think that's also a skill, is learning how to be resourceful for that stuff, knowing when you need to ask, knowing when you need to go find other things. Even like I think of people I've helped with Excel. Like for me, there's a lot of things where I'll be doing something that's like, I know it's got to be able to do this. Right? Yeah. And so I go looking.
Somebody must have done it.
But there's a lot of people where I've talked to is that doesn't even necessarily occur to them, that is a capability that some system or process should have or might have.
Yeah.
So they don't go looking for it.
Well, I think that's. I mean, you're dead on, and I think it's also just the tenacity, like you said.
We have that curiosity, like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe there's something.
It has to do it, and
Yeah.
the patience to dig in and investigate. And
Although we joke that a good engineer is a lazy engineer, because there's got to be an easier way to do this, because I'm not spending this much time again. I got to be able to do this faster next time. So I'm going to go searching, and I'm going to spend 20 hours to save 5 minutes.
well, I think everyone's doing that now with all the IA tools.
Well, sure.
Like it's not easy. Like if I don't, most of the folks I've talked to haven't really messed around with it. But my wife is online education at Grossmont and has leaned in on this.
Oh, nice. Good for her.
Because she's in the English department. And that was in the headlines early on.
Huge, right? People writing papers with AI.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So she dove in from the very beginning, and I've gotten to kind of be a part of that as she goes through it and listen to the challenges that she's been dealing with and figuring out, I could use that for some of my stuff.
Proposal writing.
Right, yeah.
You need to get sales fed, by the way.
Yeah, I saw.
You're welcome, Dave. We're
Yeah.
plugging sales fed.
But it's not easy. You've got to train it to do what you
What
want.
you wanted to do. Yeah.
Right. And it is frustrating sometimes, and you got to just kind of stick with it and talk to people what worked for you. And
You got to be careful asking for facts. 'Cause it'll make stuff up.
well, and knowing that what the limitations of the tool are, but I look at it like 25 years ago when people looked at Excel like, oh my God, I don't want to learn Excel. It's so hard. I mean, it's just another tool. It's another technology tool that you got to unpack and learn.
It's a big one too.
It is.
Somebody that I forget who it was, but they equated it kind of to the calculator, right? When the calculator first came out, and they still taught long division for, finally after a couple of decades, I don't think they teach so much long division anymore. You got to count. Like even my teachers, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket when you're walking around.
But I have one right here.
Well, actually, I do, and it's a camera and it's a phone.
That's hilarious.
Well, but I guess what I was talking about too was when I was coming up through the ranks to work in OD, we called organizational development, was the theoretical basis for some of the ideas were very, very, very shaky and not researched. In fact, we didn't have the research tools in human resources to even begin to understand how you would understand personality. Those kinds of things were they were just there to like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe we'll just have to get in and figure out how we help people get to know each other, kind of thing.
Right.
And so it is interesting that the amount of growth that you technically had access to or are now is exponentially quite different than when there was nothing
Well,
there.
and it's so much more developed, but seems like it's still just as scarce.
Yeah.
Right. And technology almost complicates it more because you don't necessarily know what's true and what isn't.
Well, I think,
and you lose that personal touch, which is so critical.
regardless of the technology tools and the state of the industry, soft skills will always be in demand, and you always need to learn those.
Yeah.
There isn't a piece of technology that's going to replace that, and you have to learn that.
I don't
somewhere.
think so, unless the robots take over.
Yeah, I mean,
But then we got bigger problems.
How could you say that? I was teasing
Hey,
him the other
I've
day.
seen The Matrix. It's a possibility.
He's in his PhD program, and God, he's bright, and he just grapples with ideas really well. And I said to him, "Oh yeah, what are you learning?" And he said, "I learned a lot of stuff." I said, "Name me one leadership model you can think of that really works." And then I said to him, and not only that, do you see any data on that? You know, it's really kind of funny, the human sciences and the problems of human science, and then transporting that to the idea of becoming a better manager.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I'm sure you were grappling with that, even though you didn't have you don't have a background in that, right?
my undergraduate's business administration. My master's is in management. So I that is my.
So could you answer that question? What leadership model do you?
Leadership isn't an algorithm, and it never will be. It just isn't. It's soft skills, it's empathy, it's emotional maturity, it's experience, and that's more of an art than it is a science. And it just, people are messy, and you need to adjust. And you need, everyone is motivated differently, and you need to recognize that and be able to adjust to each team member's need while still staying focused on the goal or objectives that you're trying to fulfill, and know when to push and when not to push. And, and you just kind of figure that out over time. I think, going back to your original question, spending 6 years in the submarine community, you learn a lot about people being that close with people.
I would imagine.
What sets people off, what works, what doesn't, the psychology of it, whether you want to or not, you're just kind of forced to figure that out. So having that early, I didn't even realize it till much later in my career. And I use that in interviews. Well, you learn a lot about someone living on a submarine.
And you're stuck in a metal tube for months at a time.
Doing very intense
Anybody
things.
does that, anybody in that must have a...
And you get your own specific roles and reputations, right? Yeah. That's, I probably shouldn't go down that road to some of the submarine stories. They might not, I might have to check the little box that we've become explicit in our podcast.
Oh,
I don't want to have to do
wow.
that. So let's shift over then back to your current role. You talked about some of the challenges being working on lots of different tasks, and I'm with you there because I'm running payroll and I'm doing HR and IT, and a lot of those things, especially IT, is become such a challenge with all the security stuff. You just can't know all that unless you're doing it every day and really digging in. But maybe focusing on the people side of it. What are some of your goals and challenges right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because that's really what we're focused on right now, is drawing on my experience of what a growth curve looks like from the early days of CSA, knowing that the system that we currently have in place or did have in place would not scale to 50 employees, 100 employees, 150. So getting organized and making those transitions now while we're still small and it isn't as painful to an organization to completely change out an HR system or whatever. Doing that now, pouring the energy into it so that it's ready. And then one of Jack's things, and I feel very strongly about this too, is that he really cares about the people. And that's a lot of companies say that, a lot of managers say that, a lot of, that's a very common message.
Right.
But they
don't live it.
Right. it's just words. Where does the rubber meet the road? So
Yeah. I love all of my people, but you're fired.
Right. Yeah. Work harder. Yeah.
Right.
So, we're actively meeting the leadership team to figure out, all right, how can we put real dollars behind what we say? And one of the things that we just transitioned to is 100% employer paid healthcare.
Oh, nice.
Which,
Nice.
for a small business, that's
quite a
expensive.
promise.
That's very
Hell
expensive.
of a
And having
promise.
good quality
Yeah.
plan too, not a garbage plan that's cheap. That's a way that we can back up what he's saying. And, we talked about it, and we were on a 80% paid, and I, looked at the cost and decided, this is an investment that we want to make long term.
Is that employee and dependents or just employee?
Employee family.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a big investment for a very small company.
It's a big overhead
It is.
cost. Yeah.
So, but that's the trade-offs that you make when you're, structuring it. Where are we going to spend our overhead dollars? And to us, that was a way to demonstrate what he's talking about. We care about you. We care about your family. We care about you as a person. And this is a way that we can to demonstrate that.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think most companies look at that as an expenditure and move on. Sure. And there aren't a lot of ways that an employer can really impact a family. And that's one of them. And, we're going to make the investment in you and your family, so you don't have to worry about that stuff. That was something I got at CSA. Brian always preached that. And it made a lot of sense to me is if you're worried about where you're going to come up with your deductible, you're not going to be focused on your mission or objective or whatever. And that, it's not an easy thing for us to take off the plate, but it is something that we strategically decided that we were going to do.
And it's visible.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
clear.
And then it's just the challenge of
Yeah.
balancing your rates with the competition and, but some companies focus on being the cheapest and some companies focus on being the highest quality.
Yeah. There's all the computations that go into it and the trade-offs, lower turnover,
Right.
The assumption being lower turnover because you offer better. So, you project it out. It isn't as big of a hit, but it definitely is in the beginning when you make that transition. And when you're on the ragged edge of profitability as a very small company, those kind of decisions are very important.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've found since I started my business too is the variability of it all when you're small. Because one person coming in at a low salary but needs benefits for an entire family can completely change your rate structure because you're talking like tens of thousands of dollars.
I don't think that's something that employees necessarily rarely ever see or
Correct.
even understand.
Yeah. No,
and why would they?
Right.
But it's a struggle on the managing a business side of how are we going to do
Right.
this?
Especially if you're doing cost plus contracts, trying to balance those rates. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. But that's good. We preach the same thing as supporting your employees and actually doing it, not just talking about it. And it's not one little thing, this or that. It's a whole series of things. How you help them develop, how you support their healthcare, all that.
Yeah, and we're in the early stages of figuring all that out. There's only so much we can do at this point, but as we grow, trying to figure out, the corporate events, not everyone likes those. And, we did Jack's a big sailor. So last year we did, he rented an America's Cup yacht and we took the whole team out and, did the zigzags through the harbor. And it was a very unique corporate experience that I've never done before. I wasn't sure, but it was fun. It was pretty cool, and I think everyone had a good time.
On
So-
a sailboat?
yeah,
Nice.
one of those big, giant America's Cup.
How big was it?
Oh, he rented
50?
one.
Yeah,
Got it.
It was.
50-footer?
I don't know sailing that
Don't
much, but
remember.
it was a big ass boat.
Yeah, Jack took us sailing, me
Yeah.
and Jimmy, one time. It was a lot of fun. We were just, going in the bay.
But figuring out those kind of things of, all right, let's go do a thing. Let's get together because especially now when everyone's just kind of spread out, we don't get together very often. So figuring out things like that, spending time talking to other companies about what are you doing? What do you do for your employees and learning from them. I've met a couple of CEOs who are doing some pretty cool things that if we actually, start growing like we want, I'll adopt some of their ideas, putting it back into the employees' hands of, all right, who am I to pick what your event is? Here's some money, go elect somebody
Sure.
from your group and plan an outing. That's pretty cool, but just kind of figuring all of that out.
Yeah, we have a company that I've been talking with, and they rolled out, they kind of stumbled upon it, but it's essentially a hobby program. So they offer, people can submit their, outside of work hobbies that they've always wanted to do or are doing, and they can, submit a proposal to get funding through the company to help fund their hobbies.
I like that idea. That's one thing that I did learn coming up is pretty much all I did was work, and eventually, you get close to burnout doing that. Learning that I'm going to expend the same amount of energy, but I need something outside of work to expend that energy on, just to get a break from work.
Sure.
And, I dove into VFW 10, 15 years ago, and it has definitely filled that for me is, I get to give back to the veteran community, hang out with people that I wouldn't normally hang out with. It gives me something separate from work to do while still, staying active and busy. I think that's important for folks to, you got to have a life outside of work. There's more than just work.
Yeah. There's actually a thing, I had never heard this until recently, but there's a thing called a leisure spending account. So just like a HSA or a FSA where you have a health savings account or a flexible spending account, you can have a leisure. This is some new thing now, a leisure spending account where you're setting money aside for leisure, for hobbies, for travel. That was kind of neat. And then the company can contribute to it. So I don't know how, I have to assume that it's still taxed. It's not like a HSA where it's pre-tax, but
it is interesting how that stuff is evolving too and keeping up with it.
Yeah, the benefits are huge. There's another one we're looking at, just to throw some ideas. There's another company we talked to that's doing basically legal support. So you pay a monthly fee. At our size, the company would have to pay for it, but once you get large enough, you can just offer it as a benefit and the employees pay. But, they pay something like, 10, 20, 30, I don't know, a couple bucks a month. And they get access like a help desk to a legal firm. And they'll do estate planning. They'll help with, not that people should hopefully have to worry about it, but divorces and, other legal problems that someone might get. But, people have those kind of things come up. And then, it's just a free service. So some of those benefits definitely is supporting employees.
Well, and most of the time I learn about those things by talking to other people who are running businesses. Just reaching out to the network and asking questions. What's worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Why did it work for you? And figuring out, can I use this? Will it work?
So here's a question, because I think we may have done this a little bit at CSA. Can you overdo it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Where it's diminishing returns of doing stuff just to do it, thinking that it's going to motivate employees when they, in the Navy, we called it mandatory fun, where, we're doing a picnic and everyone has to be there.
Mandatory fun.
Mandatory fun. Everyone who's been in the Navy or the military will know exactly what I'm talking about. And
you gotta go.
Right,
you gotta have a good time.
I just got off deployment. I don't want to spend more time with you guys, but I guess I will.
You're going to go. You're going to love it.
Yeah. And I think companies can fall into that trap as well, especially big companies, where employees just feel obligated to go to a thing, even though it isn't really something that they're interested in. Of course.
Yeah, it becomes an imposition as opposed to, or I was thinking also it's just too much change at one time. It's too much for, I got to try to worry about all these things because benefits alone is such a complicated thing. Trying to pick which plans to go with, a PPO or HMO and deductibles and, all these different things that it can be overload. Mm-hmm. And then you start just piling on all these other things, and now they got to actually invest time to understand it to make sure that they know that they're using it or not.
Yeah, I was definitely worried about that over the last few months because we switched out all of our back office infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we changed our healthcare provider, our insurance provider. Essentially, I just consolidated under one company who under a PPO who that does that. Just to make it easier for me and the employees to manage. But it did all happen at once because there's no other way to really do that.
Right.
But having that PMO, then the employees, now that we're transitioned over, they manage their own everything.
What's PMO?
Project Management Office.
Yeah, it's there's a few companies that do it, Paychex, ADP, the big providers, and we transitioned to one of those. And it was tough to essentially take little pieces and put them all together. Mm-hmm. But now that we're transitioned, I think it definitely makes it easier for me to manage because it's all in one place, one portal. But a lot of it now has gone to self-service where the employee can manage everything themselves.
Right.
If you want to make 401k changes, click done. It's all on the same portal. We just went through our open season. It makes it a lot easier. And that's back to that point of building the scale is I knew I wouldn't be able to manage the system that we had because it was way too manual. And I didn't want to bring in an HR manager and
there's two ways to address that problem. You either create efficiencies or you bring in more people.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And more people create more chaos and more admin.
Well, and more single points of failure where somebody, leaves or they get sick or whatever, then now you have a crisis.
Do you know how they were doing that?
Right, exactly.
Oh, God.
So, but to your point, that was a lot of change all at once.
Right.
And I was really worried about how the employees would handle all of that change because they're changing their medical, dental, vision, 401k, everything all at the same time. It ended up going fairly smoothly and I didn't get any negative feedback, but it was definitely a concern.
So what do you think the key was? What made it go smoothly?
How organized the company was. They managed it very well, much better than I thought they would. They assigned a program manager to
the
just
company
manage.
You went with.
Right, yeah.
Got it.
So it was a collaboration. They communicated well. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how you're going to do it. The interface for the employees was pretty straightforward and intuitive, so you didn't really have to learn a lot.
Yeah.
I think that made it smooth and not overwhelming them with choice.
Right.
They mirrored what we had before for healthcare and vision and dental. So it was just porting, and you can upgrade if you want, but keeping it fairly simple helped.
I was hoping you were going to say something around communication or transparency, but I imagine you.
Oh, for sure.
We're open with the employees and gave them good background on why you were doing what you're doing, what the value was, and the reasons behind it.
Yeah, each phase, we all the employees met with us and the company PM, and they walked us through what's going to happen, why it's going to happen, and what you need to do. And that communication, I think, is what made it seamless.
Which is a nice thing about a small business when you're our size.
Yeah.
You can get 12 people in a room and go through all that pretty easily.
Or on a Zoom.
So, yeah, and address everyone's questions without delaying, 100 other people.
Right, yeah.
Dealing with schedules.
Which is why I wanted to do it now.
Yeah.
Because when we're at 50 or 100, it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah. So what about Dre, you probably don't know this background, but James' introduction to this company was all around the time where they were splitting in half. So I was curious, the split, did that impact the employees, and how did you?
Yeah, and it still is because
we're
we did a divestiture. We essentially split the company in two, and the original ownership had to negotiate, what pieces were going where, and those are people. Yes, they're contracts, but those are people. Mm-hmm. And I had never been through anything like that before, where I was directly involved in it, and it was an interesting process, but it went as smooth as it could. It took longer than I thought it would, and we're still dealing with a little bit of it. There are a few people who, they had to get their facility clearance first that we're holding on to that will transition over. And that's another tough one of how much do you communicate when you really don't know? We're waiting on the government, or we're waiting on legal, or we're waiting on whatever. And I think that was tough for both us and the employees of, we're doing this thing.
You don't necessarily want them to be right next to you during all that, nail biting.
Right.
Kind of situation, but you also don't want them in the lurch just wondering what the heck's going on.
Yeah. Given our size, and the managers that we have and how involved leadership was, it was easier to communicate that when we knew, when something was happening. But then it's back to your other point of how much is too much, and balancing that of every little bit of news you don't need to share, but when you have something of substance, then that's the time. And I think we did an okay job. I didn't get any feedback otherwise, but you know how that goes.
There's a few squawks.
Right. Yeah.
It reminded me of a joke we tell a lot, where this company was a small tool and die company that made skill saws and really, really fine equipment. They things were going all right, and they decided that they were going to reward their employees. And they said that managers put their heads together and said, well, let's see, what can we do? And all of a sudden some guy goes, I got an idea. Let's give everybody for Thanksgiving, we'll give them a turkey. So everybody goes, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So the guy who thought, but you thought of it, you got to do it. So
I'll take that for action.
Yeah. So that's your action. And so they did it for that Thanksgiving. Next year rolls around and people are wondering, are we going to have that same deal?
Yeah.
Going to have the same deal? And they found out that not everybody was really happy with that idea. They just really didn't. It really wasn't that. So they decided, well, okay, we can clean up the messy stuff. Let's do it again. And they do it again, and now they find that it's really kind of getting under people's nerves because they didn't like it at all. Because some people got bigger turkeys than other people. Yeah. And then some people didn't want turkey, they wanted roast beef. So now they're lining up for the third year. Are we going to do this again? And this time they said, well, we'll get a part-time HR person to handle this. And so, oh God. And so they do it for a third time, and now they're
But
really...
weren't they trying to, they hired someone to balance and get the big turkey
take
to
all the orders.
Yeah,
You want a small one. And you didn't want hamburger, you didn't want turkey, you wanted ham, and just a whole bunch of stuff. Third year, So the fourth year, now they're pounding on the table. We're going to do this again this year. If you don't, I'm going to be really pissed off at this.
Now they're expecting.
And now they're expecting it. It's not a gift. It's not a sense of appreciation. It's what happened to the deal we had here. So they decided to go one more year, 4 years.
Oh man!
And but they noticed there was a very small. There was an odor around the factory, around the plant, and they went to investigate it, and they were finding there were whole turkeys and whole hams dumped into the Dixie dumpster, and people would, what were they doing? And they were taking the boxes and putting the stuff that they were making, their inventory and stuff like that, and ripping the company off through the carrying of the boxes.
Wow!
And it just got like. You look at these stories and you go, really? Really? They didn't have any idea what they were doing with it from the start, and they had no idea why they were doing it and what kind of impact were they were trying to create with it. It was just a sense of appreciation. And it ballooned out into a right that they weren't going to get anymore. And oh God, there's some of the stuff that happens when you look at people trying to do something really good. Yeah.
And started with good intentions.
Yeah, it did. It really did. But it's how people interpret that. And what can they do with it? And how all of a sudden, if you looked at some of the plans you might have come up with for your, I'm sure people were going, well, wait a minute, can I shift this over now to this and do I have to, and all kinds of stuff. Stuff you just go, oh God, why don't we just do away with this whole thing?
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect of you're never going to please everyone, so you just do the best that you can. Yeah. And I mean that's always going to be true. Yeah. The Navy was very good about that. Of you don't know that your crew is bitching seller is a happy seller. If they're not complaining, then you're doing something wrong. That's universal.
Yeah.
It's just paying attention to what it is.
What it is and what you're trying to do.
And when it's
with
serious and when it's just banter. And the whole setting of an expectation thing, I think we have always struggled with that in this industry of, especially as a small, of you want to do something good, but it might only be a 1-year thing. So you're setting and managing expectations. And I think we're a little better at it because it's what we do is a very client-based industry. So we're used to doing that, but still you can fall into those pits very easily.
Really just, it gets to the point where managers don't want that messy problem. So we're not going to do anything.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but you can definitely fall into that trap.
And some people just don't want to deal with emotions in organizations at all.
Yeah. As Mitch Hedgeberg said, you can't please all the people all the time, and all those people are at my show last night. That's a great joke. Which, speaking of which, we're kind of at time, and this camera just died.
Hey, that's my camera.
It is, but don't worry, we've got more. Redundancy.
There you go.
But we always like to end it with a joke, as you probably know, because you've watched a few of these. Did you happen to bring any jokes with you?
I did not. My wife and I were up last night trying to think of something, asking chat for jokes, and they were all terrible.
Dude, ChatGPT's not that good with jokes. I've spent a couple hours, and I've gotten a few good ones, but...
Yeah. It's one of those things where you get put on the spot and you can't think of anything, but then when I drive away, I'll have like 4.
Right. Yeah. Well, Brian's response was he didn't have any clean jokes.
Well, that's also a factor.
That's true. You were on a submarine for a number of years.
Yeah.
You've got to have jokes, but maybe not appropriate for the situation. Drea?
I was afraid you were going to do that.
Yeah. I got the little one. I told you about Jimmy ripped the 5th day out of my calendar, and I was dismayed.
Oh. No, you didn't do that.
Come on. No.
He was dismayed, huh?
My sound effects volume is down.
Where is it? Oh, no.
It was worth the wait.
Yeah, there you go.
My favorites are always a guy walks into a bar. You got any of those?
Oh, sure. You hear about the 3 Irishmen that came out of a bar? It could happen.
Once you get Dre going,
Yeah.
Unloaded.
I told a joke on a Zoom meeting, but nobody laughed. Turns out I'm not remotely funny.
Boo.
Come on,
What? Come on. That was a good one for you, man.
It's funny, but you also deserve the boo.
Give him the...
Yeah.
That's a deadpan joke if there ever was one.
Yeah, right.
Stephen Wright style.
Every morning, I take my cow on a long walk through the local vineyard. That's right. I heard it through the grapevine.
I like the Zoom joke better.
Oh, no.
Although I am a fan of anything wine related, so.
All right, there you go. Very good. Well, I think we're good. Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, very, very fun.
Hopefully it was enjoyable for you as well.
Yeah.
We'll have to do it again sometime. We can come up with some other topics.
Sure.
Now that our large audience of podcast viewers knows you.
The throng.
It's growing. We're getting there.
Is it?
That's how it starts.
I don't know.
A little at a time.
Congrats! You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for tuning in. We genuinely hope that you found value in our conversation. If you liked it, please click that like button below and subscribe so that you can stay up to date on our current episodes. And if you didn't like it, you can click the dislike button, but make sure you click it twice. We're eager to hear from you, whether it's your thoughts, questions, topic ideas, or if you're interested in our leadership training and consulting support. Leave us a comment below or reach out to us directly at info@intrinsicfirst.com. We're open to any and all feedback. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to having you back for more insightful leadership discussion. Until next time.